Welcome back to I Heart 250's podcast series, United Taste of America. The second state in our union is Pennsylvania. I'm your host, Rick K. Jones, and I want to thank you for joining us. Again, I want to remind you this series is all about the culinary history of America as we travel to each of our 50 states. And Pennsylvania clearly has a rich culinary history, which we're going to talk about today. Last week, if you hadn't had a chance to listen to last week, we were in state number 1, Delaware, that actually was part of Pennsylvania until right before the Revolutionary War. So it's interesting that these two states that border each other really kind of share a lot of the culinary history and a lot of the history of that. Pennsylvania was one of our earliest colonies. It was actually settled in 1681 by a Quaker by the name of William Penn. And William Penn was from England, and he was given a grant, a land grant, by King Charles II. And why did he get that? Well, it was a way to repay debts that were owed to William Penn's father by the king. So rather than pay with cash or pounds or whatever they used at that time, he gave him land in the New World, lots of land, Pennsylvania and most of Delaware, big land grant. And then Quakers from across England came across to settle in Pennsylvania. And again, as I mentioned, Pennsylvania originally had much of Delaware as part of it, and we featured that last week. So go back and listen to that podcast. Look, y'all know the story. Pennsylvania played an enormous role in our independence in the American Revolution. The center of literally everything was Philadelphia. Philadelphia played host to both the first and second Continental Congress meetings. And remember, the first Continental Congress meeting was, we were not going to declare our independence. We were unhappy with the king and with Parliament for doing what we felt like was imposing taxes and other restrictions on us that was not worthy of what they were doing to other Englishmen. Everybody in America thought themselves as Englishmen and wanted the same rights and privileges and didn't have those, And one of the big issues, and if you haven't had a chance to watch Ken Burns's recent special on PBS on the American Revolution, you need to go see it. But one of the big issues was the way the British handled the Native American issue or problem was telling the Native Americans they could have all the land west of the Appalachian Mountains, all of it. And so they did not allow English settlers or other settlers to go west of the Appalachians. That's not going to happen. People had come to America looking for land, wanting land. This whole manifest destiny, this whole go west movement was in our DNA. And so one of the reasons we fought the war was to free that land up. Now, it led to, again, tragic consequences as we continue to have a Native American issue, as we ran Native Americans out of their original land and ultimately pushed them west into reservations. But that was a big piece of it. And Western Pennsylvania was part of that, idea of wanting to expand the largesse of the colony. The Second Continental Congress, though, when they met, we pretty much discovered it's time to declare our independence. And as you know, Mr. Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence, and it was signed in Philadelphia that declared our independence, and then therefore they declared war on us, and we fought the American Revolution. So many of the leaders that came from Pennsylvania, Benjamin Franklin probably being the one that we all know the most, Benjamin Rush, Robert Morris, a very famous General Anthony Wayne was from Pennsylvania. George Washington famously wintered his troops in Valley Forge. Now, the reason they did that, they were close enough to Philadelphia where the British couldn't, well, they were far enough away from Philadelphia where the British wouldn't invade without them noticing, but close enough to Philadelphia if we wanted to take Philadelphia back from the British. As you may remember, the British came in and took Philadelphia, and our, congressional people had to flee to other places. Interestingly, while we were in Valley Forge, our troops needed to be trained better than they had been trained. And it took a German military man named Friedrich Wilhelm von Steuben who came. He'd been classically trained, Austrian, been trained in European theater. He joined General Washington's staff, and he actually trained our troops. And the training that our troops had at Valley Forge ultimately led to success on the battlefield. And so Valley Forge, if you hadn't been to Valley Forge, Pennsylvania National Park, you got to go there and see. Now, that winter was a horrible winter. I mean, snow every day. Our troops had very little clothing. Again, if you watch the Ken Burns series, I was reminded that more Americans died of disease than died in the war. The troops died of dysentery and cholera and other diseases that spread through camps. And even when we were fighting, in many cases, we were fighting with soldiers that were very, very ill and ill-equipped to fight battles. So, again, I encourage all of you, watch the Ken Burns series. I'll tell you a quick story about Ken Burns. I gave a speech several years ago at the IAG conference in Chicago. And after I gave my speech, a woman came up to me named Lynn Novick. And you may recognize Lynn Novick. She's been with Ken Burns forever as an executive producer. And she came up to me and she said, "Rick, we need money for our documentary series. We need corporate sponsors. Would you come meet with Ken?" And I agreed. And a few weeks later, I flew to Burlington, Vermont, and drove to Ken Burns' home in Wap Hall, New Hampshire. Had a cup of soup for lunch with him on his porch. Went to his barn where he did his editing. And he said, "I have this very important film coming out called The Civil War, and I need corporate sponsors to help me with that." And I agreed to seek some sponsors, and I left. And about a week later, Ken called me and said, "Rick, I have good news for me and not so good news for you." I said, "Well, what's the good news?" He said, "I've just done a 10-picture deal with General Motors. They've agreed to be my sole sponsor for not only this picture, but 10 pictures. So I don't need any more sponsors." Well, I was thrilled for him. And as a gift, he gave me a VHS, remember VHS, collection of the Civil War. So I don't have anything in my house that can play that anymore. But on my shelf in my study in my office is the box set of the Civil War given to me by Ken Burns. I love Ken Burns, love all the series. The Revolutionary War is exceptional, and it'll give you a better understanding as we celebrate our 250th birthday about the Rev War and how it really was the first American Civil War, because it was loyalists versus patriots, brothers against brothers in many cases. Philadelphia continued to play a large role after the Revolutionary War. After the war, the outline of the United States Constitution was actually written in Philadelphia in 1787. But then what did they do? They moved the capital to New York, and we'll talk about that when we talk about the state of New York. Now, Western expansion really began in Pennsylvania, and it really began with the Pennsylvania Dutch, the Swiss Germans, the Amish people, the Mennonite people, that for religious purposes came to Pennsylvania. Now, they came for religious because they were being persecuted, but they also got cheap land. There were some great land deals because, again, the Quakers that ran Pennsylvania wanted to expand to the west. And they moved west of Philadelphia, out the main line, out towards a place called Lancaster, Pennsylvania, in that area. And then later in the 1880s, even more Pennsylvania Dutch. More Germans came to that area. It's a beautiful area of Pennsylvania, beautiful farms. They still ride, horse and buggies, and it's a beautiful place. Some of you may have seen the classic Peter Weir movie, Witness. Great movie, one of my favorite movies of all time. Harrison Ford, Kelly McGillis. It's about a Philadelphia police officer who, an Amish boy who's visiting Philadelphia, sees a murder. And he realizes that the people that did the murder were other police officers. And he flees and he's been shot, and he recovers in this farmhouse in the Amish region. And one of the greatest movie scenes of all time is the barn building, where they put up a barn. And it is one of the most beautiful pieces of filmmaking I've ever seen, this scene. And it's interesting because Harrison Ford, if you know anything about him as an actor, he was a carpenter before he was an actor. And so when he's building the barn in this movie, Witness, he knows what he's doing because he's a carpenter, and it's really a wonderful scene. After the Revolutionary War, many of our soldiers were not paid in cash, but were paid in land. And much of that land came from Western Pennsylvania areas. And then from 1790 till about 1840, Pennsylvania was our largest agricultural producer of all the colonies in there. Now, the most important, most prestigious, the turning point of the Civil War was the battle fought in Pennsylvania at Gettysburg. The South was dominating the war. Robert E. Lee's troops were winning battles, were pushing. He was trying to take the will out of the North by pushing himself into the Northern Territory, and it backfired. And it backfired with Pickett's Charge that you're familiar with. And there was a professor from Bowdoin College named Joshua Chamberlain that had a thing called the pivot that really saved the Battle of Gettysburg, and the Union won that battle and then went on to win the war. Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Post-Civil War, Pennsylvania became known as the Steel State. The steel industry grew in Western Pennsylvania, and a large number of immigrants from around the world came to live and work in Western Pennsylvania, in the mines and in the steel industry. And Pittsburgh, is kind of the capital of Western Pennsylvania, and it's really a hub for a lot of immigrants and immigrant peoples that came from literally from all over the world. Now, Pennsylvania uncannily has been able to pick presidential winners in almost every presidential election, with two exceptions. They didn't pick Thomas Jefferson when he beat John Adams in that election, and they didn't pick Andy Jackson. So with the exception of Andrew Jackson and Thomas Jefferson, they've picked correctly every president of the United States, including our sitting president, Donald Trump. Twice Pennsylvania said he was going to be the winner, and he was. But interestingly, with all of this history around the founding of America, only two presidents have been born in Pennsylvania. Only two. We talked about one last week. He's more known for being from Delaware, Joe Biden, but he was born in Pennsylvania. And the second one was James Buchanan. Those are the only two presidents from the state of Pennsylvania. We've got an incredible playlist. Our weekly musical playlist this week is full of great songs about Pennsylvania. One of the songs is the famous song Allentown by Billy Joel. We've got Philadelphia Freedom by Elton John. From the movie Rocky, we've got Gonna Fly Now by Bill Conte. And then there was an R&B sound called the Philadelphia Sound. And one of my favorite groups from that era was Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes. And they had a lead singer by the name of Teddy Pendergrast, who was a phenomenal lead singer. And we've got the song The Love I Lost on our playlist. And then we've got a really fun song from the movie Groundhog Day. Remember Groundhog Day with Bill Murray? One of my favorite movies. It's the Pennsylvania Polka from the movie Groundhog Day. Great, great musical playlist this week. The culinary history of Pennsylvania is like so many of our other states, is the story of immigrants and their foods. Now, Pennsylvania in colonial times was English, very, very English, Quaker English, proper English, and so many of their foods reflected the foods of England. And so we had English food like stews and chowders, um, lots of seafood, lots and lots of seafood because Philadelphia sits on a magnificent bay, that feeds out into the Atlantic Ocean. They also were famous for puddings, the sweets that went into puddings. And then we talked to you that the Pennsylvania Dutch came in, and they came in very early, and they brought all their great classic foods, Swiss German foods that they adapted. And so the Pennsylvania Dutch area is famous for foods like shoo-fly pie, chow chow, scrapple, sauerbraten. They invented pretzels in that area, both hard and soft pretzels. Very famous for apple butter. I love apple butter. It's just, put apple butter on bread. It's just so, so good. And they're also famous for chicken pot pie in the Pennsylvania Dutch region of Pennsylvania. The Italians came in mass. A lot of people don't realize this, but between 1830 and between 1880 and 1930, in that period, about a 50-year period, 2/3 of all Southern Italians, which included the island of Sicily, immigrated. There was famine, there was poverty, there weren't jobs, and so many of them came to Australia, some came to South America, but most came to where? The United States. And a lot of them settled in Pennsylvania, and a whole lot of them settled in South Philly. And so you've got, Italian food in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh that's second to none. Great classic red sauces, tomato pie, Italian wedding soup, which is one of my favorite soups, with a little pasta, little tiny meatballs, hoagie sandwiches. The Italians are famous for sandwiches, and they brought gelatos and Italian pastries. And so even today, when you go to South Philly, some of the great Italian restaurants in America are in little bitty hole in the walls in South Philly. Western Pennsylvania, as we mentioned, though, a lot of Eastern Europeans came to work in the mines. And so they're famous for classic Polish foods, things like pierogies. And there was a couple of brothers named the Primanti brothers, and they made sandwiches largely for the miners, where they put meat, cheese, coleslaw, and French fries literally on the sandwich. So you get your sandwich with fries, but the fries are already on the sandwich, and that way you can eat it all. You take it to the mine. You can have it one hand, eat it, the other hand, do something else. And the Primanti brothers, the company still makes amazing sandwiches in Western Pennsylvania. Now, how many of you out there have a sweet tooth? I don't have as big a sweet tooth as a lot of other people do, but if you have a sweet tooth, Pennsylvania is a pretty good place for two things. One, Hershey's chocolates. Hershey Chocolate Company, based in Hershey, Pennsylvania. Milk chocolate, second to none. Great, great products. But Pennsylvania also is famous for tasty cakes. Tasty cakes, those little pastries that you get that are just amazing. Another food company that was founded and continues to operate out of Pittsburgh is the Heinz Company. We all know Heinz from Heinz 57 sauce, but we know them mostly for what? Ketchup. Heinz ketchup, which is the leading ketchup in the world. But there's one iconic dish that if I name the city, you know what the dish is. If I say, I'll have a Philly, you know exactly what to order. What are you thinking? It's a Philadelphia or a Philly cheesesteak. And there are lots of cheesesteak places all over Philadelphia. But there are two that are very famous and notable. And what's interesting is they are literally across the street from each other. And that's Pat's King of Steaks and Geno's. The oldest one is Pat's. Pat's King of Steaks started in 1930 by an Italian-American named Pat Oliveri. Now, here's the legendary story. It's 1930, and Pat owns a hot dog stand. Like so many other people, he owned a hot dog stand. But one day, he went to the Italian market that was within walking distance of his hot dog stand, and he got some scraps of meat, and he got some onions, and he got a roll, and he made himself a lunch of seared leftover meat along with some onions on a roll. And he had a regular customer who drove a taxi, and he showed up that day to get his usual hot dog, and he goes, "Hey, what are you eating?" And he goes, "Well, I'm eating the sandwich that I made." And he said, "Well, let me try that." And he tried it, and he said, "Pat, quit making hot dogs and make this sandwich." And the legendary Pat's King of Steaks was born. Now, Pat was an iconic and fascinating character. This is a guy who ran with movie stars and the common man at the same time. Very interesting personality. He loved and made friends with some of the classic Italian-American singers. He was good friends with Dean Martin, with Vic Damone, with Al Martino. This guy, bet on horses regularly, owned some race horses at one time. And this is a very famous place. I mean, it's got neon signs. It's just a spectacular place. They filmed a number of movies there. One of the most famous movies they filmed there is the classic Academy Award-winning movie, Rocky. Again, we talked about today, our playlist has a song from Rocky, Gonna Fly Now, by Bill Conte. They filmed part of the movie Rocky there. There's a plaque at Pat's today where Sylvester Stallone stood in the movie Rocky. The place today is run by Pat's nephew, Frank Oliveri. And let me tell you this, Frank's as big a character as Pat was. Just Frank's, you meet people and like in the first 5 minutes of meeting them, you go, "I'm going to be friends with this guy forever." It's this guy. This guy is just absolutely one of the great characters and one of my favorite people. What is the famous Philly's cheesesteak? It's a steak sandwich. Interestingly, they get their ribeyes from New Zealand and Australia. One of the reasons beef is so high in America right now, y'all, is we don't grow enough cows. Since COVID, we've quit growing as much cattle as we have in the past, and it's hard to get stuff. I saw the other day where a big meat processing plant in Nebraska closed, a ConAgra plant, because we don't have enough beef, and that's a problem. So Pat's, and we'll talk about Geno's in a minute, both of them get their ribeyes for their cheesesteaks from Australia and New Zealand. Now, the original cheesesteak, guess what? For about 30 years, didn't have cheese. It was a sandwich of sliced meat and onions and peppers. And then somebody at some point said, "Why don't you put cheese on it?" The rest is history. And it's interesting, they have 4 kinds of cheeses. They have what we call cheese whiz, that you dip it. I like to say it's a cheese-like product, cheese whiz. They have provolone, they have American, and now they have Cooper Sharp cheddar. And you put onions and peppers on it. They serve fries, and they now have a chicken version of it. They cook it, and it literally almost deteriorates. They don't chop it up, but it's cut so thin that just moving the meat around breaks it up, and it's chopped. Pat's King of Steaks. Then there's the competitor, literally across the street, Geno's. It was founded by Joey Vento in 1966. Now, you want to talk about balls? you have a cheesesteak against the king of cheesesteaks across the street. Well, Joey Vento was one of these guys, little short guy. You didn't tell him what he couldn't do. Somebody said, "You're not going to survive." He said, "I'll show you." Today, that's obviously a great neighborhood institution. It's worked out really well for him. Now, he named the restaurant Geno's, and he named it Geno's with a Geno because somebody else had a restaurant called Geno's named Gino. Well, he had a son in 1971. What did he name his son? Geno, Geno. And that son, Geno, now runs the place. What's kind of the difference between Geno's and Pat's? Geno's has a bigger menu. They also have seating inside the restaurant and outside the restaurant. Pat's doesn't have any seating inside the restaurant. They have some counters outside, but you usually take it to go. But Geno's has seating inside, and they have a larger menu. They've got Italian hoagies. Hoagie, where'd that name come from? Well, the speculation is, again, it was Italians that made sandwiches at the Navy shipyards in Philadelphia, where the ships built on a place called Hog Island. Hoggies, hoagies. That's where the name hoagie supposedly came from. They also make pork sandwiches. There's another famous pork sandwich place in proximity called John's. And they make a great meatball sandwich. And again, that's kind of the difference. Geno's honors first responders, police, military people, firemen, in a couple of unique ways. They have displayed in the restaurant a lot of badges, patches from fire and police from all over the world, literally all over the world. They have thousands of them posted. And a lot of you know about military challenge coins that the military will give you. They have challenge coins. They have those that have been given to them on display in the restaurant. All right, so what's the difference between the two places? Well, they both have their breads made for them custom, but the breads are a little different. One's a little more chewier, one's a little crisper. They're both amazing. The cheesesteaks at Pat's fall apart, and so it looks like it's chopped, but they're sliced at Geno's. And so they're a little thicker, they're sliced, they don't fall apart. But looking, it's like arguing about your favorite children. I mean, both are terrific. Both are open 24 hours. And so somebody said, "What is your favorite one?" And I said, "The one I'm eating right now. That's my favorite. But you really want to do it right? Go get one from both places and eat them both. You won't be sorry." It's Pat's, King of Steaks, and Geno's, South Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Today's three from me are all uniquely different places to eat in Pennsylvania. Since we've been talking about Philadelphia, let's start in Philadelphia, but not at a restaurant, but at a food market. How many of you played the game Monopoly? Remember Boardwalk and Park Place and all that? Next week, we're going to talk a lot about Monopoly because the Monopoly board is what city in America? It's Atlantic City in New Jersey, and we're going to talk about that in state number 3. But if you play Monopoly, you would try to collect the railroads, remember? And one of the railroads was the Reading Railroad. Take a ride on the Reading Railroad. The Reading Terminal is in Philadelphia, and it is now a gigantic food market. And this place serves amazing and very different foods. You can get Asian food, Caribbean food, Cajun food. You want diner food, they have a diner in there. You want Pennsylvania Dutch food, they've got that. Listen, they got it all. But my favorite among lots of favorites is a place called Dinick's, Dinics, Italian family, and they're famous for their hot roast beef, pork, or meatball sandwiches. Again, it's an old Italian family. They've got a stall there, amazing sandwiches. I first ate there a few years ago, Within walking distance of the Reading Market is one of the most famous basketball arenas in all of America. It's called the Palestra. The Palestra is on the campus of the University of Pennsylvania. And for years, they played what we call Big Five basketball there. That was the five Philadelphia schools would all play. Well, a few years ago, I had a chance to go to a double header at the Palestra. There was an 11 a.m. tip-off between Temple University, one of the Big Five, and the University of Maryland. We watched that game. Then we went to the Reading Market and ate all afternoon, and then came back for the nightcap, the 7 o'clock tip between two Philadelphia schools, St. Joe's and Penn. What a day. I'm an old basketball coach, and they have a saying on the wall at the Palestra, and the saying goes like this: to play the game is great, to win the game is greater, but to love the game is greatest of all. The Palestra in Philadelphia, go to basketball games there, walk to the Reading Market, eat till it ouches. It's a great place. Second restaurant, we were speaking about Pennsylvania Dutch food, and there are really two places near Lancaster, Pennsylvania, a place called Bird in the Hand, another place called Intercourse, that are famous for Amish food. If you have a large group, a big group, like you got a busload of people, you want to go to a place called Plain and Fancy Farmhouse in Bird in the Hand. What a great name for a town. Bird in the Hand, Pennsylvania. This place is amazing. But if it's just you and your family, you want to go to a place called Yoder's Restaurant and Buffet in New Holland, Pennsylvania. Again, all of the great Pennsylvania Dutch foods, all served buffet style or family style. Wonderful food. And finally, we talked about the Eastern Europeans that migrated to Western Pennsylvania in the Pittsburgh area. There's a great restaurant right outside of Pittsburgh called Optika, and it's a Polish place. Borscht, amazing pierogies, stuffed cabbage, all those great Eastern European classics are at Optika in Pittsburgh. 3 from me in Pennsylvania. So today we have featured cheesesteaks from South Philly and lots of other great foods from Pennsylvania as part of United Taste of America. We hope to see you back here next week with the tease that I gave you about state number 3 at States, New Jersey. We'll see you then.